Evan Osnos, Wildland, The Making of America's Fury. In Wildland, The Making of America's Fury, Evan Osnos skillfully interweaves the stories of three distinct American locations, Greenwich, Connecticut, Clarksburg, West Virginia, and Chicago, Illinois, to provide insight into the forces shaping today's polarized political landscape. The summary will delve into the development of Greenwich as an epicenter of wealth and capitalism, Clarksburg's decline due to the coal industry, and Chicago's struggles with racial inequity. Throughout the summary, Osnos explores how these various factors culminate in public frustration, the emergence of a populist political agenda, and the eventual January 6th insurrection.
Greenwich, the storied riches of Connecticut's hotbed. Greenwich, Connecticut's upscale history began when the railroad made it accessible in 1848. It became a haven for the wealthiest, who built mansions during the Gilded Age. After these mansions went out of style following the Great Depression, the town adopted a coat of arms bearing simple values such as courage and thrift. However, the 2000s found the wealthy returning to their Gilded Age opulence, surpassing it. Greenwich had become the epicenter of a new capitalist vision as financiers and economists began developing high-risk, high-reward investments through hedge funds. The top earners had separated themselves from the rest of the country in many ways, including accumulating individual wealth so high that tax officials monitored the wealthiest taxpayers. As their ethical values shifted away from the general culture, restraint was out of style, and financial gain became the sole value that mattered. Greenwich's changes reflected broader shifts in the American economic ecosystem. The Republican Party's moderate wing disintegrates. Prescott Bush, a politically moderate figure, could have been the one to lead the Republican Party into the new century. However, the party's moderate wing began disintegrating from the mid-1960s onward. The shift to the right was prompted by J. William Middendorf II, an investment banker who became a disciple of libertarianism, and Barry Goldwater, an Arizona senator with libertarian beliefs. The party's steady rightward shift became evident when Goldwater won the presidential nomination in 1964, and the moderate wing was denounced at the Republican National Convention. Libertarianism remained largely at the fringes until the rise of talk radio star Rush Limbaugh in the 90s. The doors blew wide open after moderate Mitt Romney lost the 2012 election to Barack Obama. The party stood at a crossroads between moving left or appealing to missing white voters with a populist disruptor who would rail against the very notion of government. The Tragedy of Clarksburg. The story of Clarksburg, West Virginia, is a tale of decline that began with a new revolution in mining and was compounded by changes in the way Americans consumed news. In the mid-20th century, the city had been a booming hub of activity, but today it is a shell of its former self, suffering from high rates of smoking, obesity, diabetes, and prescription drug abuse. The exodus, which is the highest per capita in the country, began when companies began buying rights to remove nearby mountaintops in a new mining technique known as mountaintop removal. Meanwhile, young people left the state to find work, reducing the tax pool to fund the city even further. And as print advertising fell across American newspapers by a massive 71%, newspapers across the country began collapsing, leaving a deficit in local news, which had previously been a social source of cohesion and connection. The Great Migration's impact. The Great Migration brought Black Americans to Chicago. However, they were met with racism and housing discrimination, resulting in segregation. Chicago's racist history affected Black Americans like Reese, who struggled with education and eventually ended up in prison. This story highlights the ongoing plight of Black Americans in the U.S. America's Twilight Era. The aftermath of 9/11 led to a new era fueled by fear in America, with the wars in the Middle East seeming like distant conflicts. The resulting uncertainty flushed out deep-rooted fears among Americans, which eventually led to a distrust of immigrants, with the Republican Party tapping into those fears to stir up support. Donald Trump's speeches magnified the paranoia even further, relying on false accusations to solidify his anti-immigrant stance. The National Rifle Association also saw a decline in sales and began marketing guns as a form of self-defense with an entirely new aesthetic. Trump seized this opportunity to play on the public's fear of terrorism, despite violence actually decreasing. Overall, the country was caught in a twilight era of perpetual conflict and paranoia. Shifts in working-class depictions. In this book, the author describes how working-class depictions have transformed over the years. The summary outlines the shift from the heroic images of working-class men in the 1930s to the degrading portrayals in the 1990s. The author argues that this degradation is occurring in the context of systemic discrimination against working-class people. The establishment's failure to provide health care to West Virginia's coal miners is one example of this. The narrative also highlights the shooting of black teenager Laquan McDonald, which drew attention to the broken system inhabited by political leaders like Rahm Emanuel. The key message of this book is that the American populace's rage has increased as the establishment fails to address systemic issues. Trump's agenda of destruction. Trump's presidency was characterized by a deliberate reduction in government function, attacks on the media, the empowerment of corporate interests, and cultural rifts. The convergence of factors in Greenwich, Clarksburg, and Chicago contributed to Trump's victory in the 2016 election, despite losing the county overall in Greenwich. Additionally, black voter turnout dropped, leading to his inauguration and eventually the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists' doomsday clock moving closer to midnight than it had since 1952. However, throughout his presidency, Trump implemented an agenda of destruction. Trump actively worked to reduce government function and left hundreds of federal jobs unfilled, causing a 42% increase in the number of employees who quit or retired from the beginning of Obama's term. Trump also attacked the media and dismantled the notion of truth. These actions enabled the federal government to prioritize corporate and investor interests. The $1.5 trillion tax cut Trump signed benefited the top 1% far more than the bottom 20%. Along with these actions, Trump's rhetoric and behavior fostered cultural divisions. Trump's track record on assaulting women created a dangerous new world, in which a member of the town council in Greenwich touched a government employee's groin and said he could now act without political correctness. Social cohesion dropped significantly, and a report by political scientists in 2018 indicated that a concerning percentage of Americans believed the country would be better off if large numbers of the opposing party died. Overall, Trump's presidency set out to destroy the government, media, and the social cohesion of the nation. A dysfunctional system. The COVID-19 pandemic and the Black Lives Matter protests have exposed a faulty system in America. Despite being the richest country, it was unable to provide masks and tests to protect its citizens, and unemployment levels were at its lowest in decades. The pandemic disproportionately affected low-income neighborhoods, where social distancing was difficult and millions had already lost their health insurance. The black community, in particular, suffered the harshest effects of the virus, with pre-existing conditions and economic and social disparities leading to higher death rates. The murder of George Floyd further shed light on a broken system where blacks were more likely to die at the hands of the police. Trump used the BLM protests to further divide the nation, with only a small percentage resulting in looting and violence, but the images were used to incite fear and encourage people to buy guns. Capitol insurrection and the fragility of democracy. The January 6 insurrection was the culmination of more than 20 years of pain, anger, neglect, cynicism, and lies that all served as fuel for a flame that threatened to burn democracy to the ground. Trump's efforts to subvert the election failed, and the insurrection resulted in 7 American deaths. Biden called for caution, stating that democracy is precious and fragile.
In conclusion, Wildland highlights the intersections of socioeconomic, political, and cultural forces at play in shaping contemporary America. The examination of Greenwich, Clarksburg, and Chicago illustrates the systemic issues affecting various classes and populations, leading to an increasingly divided nation. From the decline of the moderate Republican wing and the rise of the Democratic establishment to the compounding factors of the COVID-19 pandemic, these experiences share a common thread that resulted in the dramatic events of January 6th. By understanding these complex underpinnings, readers are better equipped to analyze the current state of American society and consider ways to bridge the ever-growing divisions within it.